There is a thought that appears quietly in many relationships, not at the beginning, but over time. After enough conversations, after enough effort, after enough moments of waiting. The thought sounds like this: why does it feel like I care more than they do? It doesn't usually come from one big moment. It builds slowly. You notice small things. You reply quickly. They reply later. You check in. They respond, but rarely initiate. You remember details. They forget some of them. And piece by piece, a pattern begins to form in your mind. You start measuring effort. Not consciously, but subtly. You begin comparing what you do versus what they do. And eventually, the conclusion feels obvious. I care more. But that conclusion deserves to be examined more carefully. Because in many cases, the issue is not just about how much someone cares. It is about how care is expressed and interpreted. Most people don't measure effort objectively. They measure it based on their own behavior. If you reply quickly, you expect quick replies. If you check in often, you expect the same. If you express care in a certain way, you begin to look for that same pattern in return. And when it doesn't appear, it feels like absence. But absence of familiarity is not always absence of care. It is often just difference. Difference in communication. Difference in attention. Difference in how people express connection. Some people show care through consistency. Others show it through presence when it matters. Some people check in frequently. Others assume the relationship is stable and doesn't require constant expression. And when these differences meet, misunderstanding begins. You see your effort clearly because you experience it directly. But you don't always see the other person's effort in the same way because it doesn't follow your pattern. So it becomes less visible, less measurable, and eventually it can feel like it doesn't exist at all. Brené Brown once said, "Connection is why we're here." But connection becomes fragile when it starts to feel unequal. Not always because it is unequal, but because it feels that way. And feelings, when repeated enough, begin to feel like facts. Before we continue, a quick pause. If this reflection is resonating with you, there are more videos like this inside the Relationships and Identity playlist on this channel. Each video explores patterns in how we connect, interpret, and respond in relationships. And if you want more calm reflections like this, consider subscribing to Daily Reset Lab. Now, let's continue. Another layer of this experience is expectation. Most expectations in relationships are not spoken. They are assumed. You assume that effort should look a certain way. You assume that care should be expressed in a certain pattern. You assume that consistency should match your own. But when expectations are unspoken, they cannot be understood by the other person. So the gap between expectation and reality begins to grow. Not because someone is doing something wrong, but because two different standards are being used. And when that gap grows, it creates a quiet tension. You begin noticing more. You begin interpreting more. You begin questioning more. And slowly, the relationship starts to feel heavier. Not because of what is happening, but because of what is being compared. There is also something else happening beneath the surface. When you invest emotionally in a relationship, your awareness of that investment increases. You remember what you did, what you said, how much time you gave. But you don't track the other person's effort with the same clarity. So your own contribution feels larger, more visible, more significant. And this can create the feeling that you are giving more than you are receiving. Sometimes that feeling is accurate, but sometimes it is incomplete, because it is based on one perspective, your own. This is why awareness becomes important. Not to dismiss your feelings, but to examine them, to ask, what am I measuring? What am I expecting? What am I assuming? Because those questions shift your perspective. Sometimes you may realize that the relationship is actually unbalanced, and that realization is important. Other times, you may realize that the imbalance exists more in perception than in reality. And that realization is equally important. A small practical step you can try is this. Instead of measuring effort only by your own standard, try observing the relationship more neutrally. What does the other person actually do? When do they show up? How do they express care? Not how you would do it, but how they do it. And if something feels unclear, express it simply. Not as a complaint, but as clarity. I realize I feel more connected when we check in more often. This creates understanding, instead of silent comparison, because connection becomes more stable when it is understood, not assumed. Let's delve a little deeper into these differences in expression. Think about the concept of love languages. While often applied to romantic relationships, the underlying principle is universal. People give and receive care in different ways. One person might express care through acts of service, always offering practical help. Another might prioritize quality time, valuing shared experiences above all else. Someone else might use words of affirmation, needing to hear verbal appreciation, while their partner might show care through gifts or physical touch. When these languages don't align, it's easy to misinterpret a partner's genuine efforts as a lack of care, simply because it's not expressed in our preferred dialect. The challenge, then, is not to force everyone to speak our love language, but to learn to recognize and appreciate the languages of others. It requires empathy, a willingness to step outside our own framework, and a conscious effort to see the world from their perspective. This isn't about lowering our standards or accepting less than we deserve. It's about expanding our understanding of what care looks like. It's about recognizing that a quiet act of support, a thoughtful gesture, or simply being present in a crisis can be just as profound an expression of care as a constant stream of messages or frequent check-ins. This journey of understanding also requires courage. It takes courage to voice our unspoken expectations, to admit that we might be measuring unfairly, and to ask for what we need in a way that invites connection rather than defensiveness. It means being vulnerable enough to say, "This is how I feel cared for," and open enough to hear, "This is how I show I care." This dialogue transforms silent comparison into shared understanding, moving us from a place of perceived inequality to one of mutual respect and appreciation for each other's unique ways of connecting. Because ultimately, the goal isn't to find someone who cares exactly like we do. The goal is to build a connection where both individuals feel seen, valued, and understood in the ways they express and receive care. It's about creating a relationship where differences are not sources of tension, but opportunities for deeper empathy and a richer, more nuanced understanding of love and connection. If this reflection made you think about your own relationships, you may find the other videos in the Relationships and Identity playlist helpful. Each one explores patterns that shape how we connect and how awareness can change those patterns. And if you want more calm reflections like this, subscribe to Daily Reset Lab, because sometimes the feeling that you care more is not just about effort. It's about how you're measuring it and how you're communicating about it.